Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here with us for this interview. We have a very special interview. Mr. Ronnie A. Nichols is going to join us today. I'm really excited about this interview. Some of you may recognize his name. He's a native of Little Rock. He graduated from Central High School. He also graduated from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock with a bachelor's in art and a minor in American history. He also got his master's degree from Otis Arts Institute of Los Angeles. In addition, he is an alumnus of the W.K. Kellogg National Fellowship Program. Many of you may recognize him from his over 35 years in the museum field here in Little Rock. He has worked at the Arkansas Arts Center as the Director of Audience Development. He was also director of the Delta Cultural Center down in Helena, as well as the director of the Arkansas, or the Old State House Museum in Trapnall Hall. So he has an extensive history and experience with Little Rock. He's also a descendant of a Black Civil War veteran. And in his career, he has studied, researched, and presented many programs regarding African-American soldiers in the Civil War, and particularly in Arkansas. He is a designer and guest curator of an exhibit called Freedom, Oh Freedom, Arkansas People of African Descent in the Civil War, 1861 through 65, that was at the Mosaic Templar here in Little Rock on display there. And we're really excited to have him here today. He currently has the Nichols Consulting business. He provides planning, research, technical services, and Civil War military and African American history for films, publications, public programs. He was also a technical advisor for the movie Glory. So we're really excited to have you here, Mr. Nichols. Thank you for joining us.
So thank you. It's good to be here. It's good to be able to talk to folks there in Little Rock and in Arkansas in general.
Well, you know, the reason I wanted to interview you is you've done extensive research and talked publicly and given many programs regarding African-American soldiers in the Civil War, particularly here in Arkansas. And if you could just start by discussing African-American troops maybe before the Civil War, and then how they became very prominent during the Civil War.
Okay. Just in brief, one of the initial wars, the American Revolutionary War, George Washington was shocked when he came to the Battle of Bunker Hill and saw that there were Black men in line fighting. And he immediately started requesting that they be dismissed, but come to find out that they were some of his best fighters. And also due to the fact that there was a shortage of men to fight, he maintained and retained those Black men. During the Revolutionary War, there was over 5,000 Black men who served in the Army as well as in the Navy. And then from there, the War of 1812, there were Black men who served there as well. And from 1812, there was also, as part of that military pay, there were land grants given. And one particular person, Peter Calder, who was with the U.S. 3rd Rifles, received a land grant in Marion County, Arkansas. So you have a person of African descent who received a land grant there in Arkansas and made his home there, as well as establish his community there in Marion County, Arkansas. And from there, the Mexican War. The Mexican War was really to expand slavery. There were a number of Black men who served basically in the Navy, but there were also Black men who served in the Army as well. And then, of course, the U.S. Civil War. In 1862, there was provision made for Black men to join the military, but basically as servants, well, not so much servants, but also as to help the U.S. government. And it also helped establish some freedom for them. But then again, in 1863 with the Emancipation Proclamation, Black men were taken into the U.S. Army as well as the Navy, and basically all branches of the federal government except the Marine Corps. And so with the advent of Black men serving in the U.S. Service during the Civil War, you had over 185,000 Black men to serve throughout. Here in Arkansas, there were 5,526 Black men who were initially, I guess what do you call it, dedicated or to the state of Arkansas. But in addition to that, there was probably another 5,000 men of African descent that also came into the state and served.
Right, and as we initially talked about at the beginning of the Civil War, there was a policy where African Americans were actually barred from serving in the Army.
That's correct.
And even though many at the beginning, African Americans in the North wanted to join the Union Army, they were turned away. But can you take us through how that changed and why that exactly changed, how the Lincoln administration and the War Department changed their view on it?
Well, just in brief, with the War of 1812, and this is a passage that I'm just going to read here briefly. It said that in the spring of 1815, a discharge was under the order of the War Department directing that soldiers of color be discharged. The register of this discharge, a military district of Boston, bears the following remarks: being a Negro is deemed unfit to associate with Americans and not fit to accompany American soldiers. So this is in 1815. And then in 1820, there was a law that was passed by an act by Congress that basically said that no Negroes or mulattoes would be received as recruits of the U.S. Army. So those were legislative acts that were done that actually barred Black men from serving in the military after 1820. Even though the Mexican War, there were some Black men who served, I think it was 1,000 Black men served in the Navy during the Mexican War.
Right, and so that policy is in effect as the Civil War begins, and what really changes? How does the United States government change its mind and allow with the creation of what would be the United States Colored Troops?
Well, a lot of people, a lot of historians have argued for years that the Civil War is not about slavery, but it was about slavery. And so with the Vicksburg campaign, which until was in the Mississippi Valley, there was a great need for men to serve. And so the Mississippi Valley, because of mosquitoes, malaria, and so forth, there were men that did not want to actually serve in the U.S. Army. Matter of fact, in 1863, there was a draft riot because there were white men, Irishmen and all, that didn't want to serve. And they also basically said they didn't want to go into the service to free Negroes. And so what Lincoln did was expand by sending his general to basically to the South, to Helena, Arkansas. And this is where on April 6, 1863, General Lorenzo Thomas, one of the highest ranking one of the highest ranking officers in the U.S. Army, presented before over 7,000 white soldiers the policy of the Emancipation Proclamation, and also again, the introduction of using Black men as military men.
And as we know from history, USCT troops are starting to be used around the country, particularly with Black soldiers in Arkansas. Could you speak to some of the battles that Black soldiers in Arkansas distinguished themselves? Because there's a number of units in battle.
In Arkansas, during the time of the war, there was at least 30 major minor engagements that Black troops participated in. Believe it or not, there were black men and black soldiers at the Battle of Helena. Several of them were wounded there at the battle, even though they had only been in the service only for about a month or so. They were placed in a situation where they try to keep them out of harm's way, but some of them were armed, but was also wounded by artillery shell by Confederate fire. The others that a lot of people don't know is the Battle of Pine Bluff, Arkansas in 1863. After the defeat of Little Rock, black troops were being raised in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. And 2 companies were there during the time of the Battle of Pine Bluff. And then those that people probably know more about is Poison Springs, Arkansas, where the first Kansas Colored, and then also there's Jenkins Ferry. And this goes on and on of those men serving UCT, serving in battle in Arkansas.
And there was a lot of resentment, particularly among Southern troops, to having to fight against Black troops. And this leads to a dark chapter in Civil War history, particularly here in Arkansas at the Battle of Poison Springs, where surrendering Black troops are basically massacred.
Yeah, the Battle of Poison Spring goes back to, I guess, sort of a payback for the Battle of Honey Springs in Indian Territory. What a lot of people don't realize as well is that Native troops, Indian Home Guards, also had a good number of Black men as a part of them. And I want to allude to December of 1862 at the Battle of Prairie Grove. There was the first Indian Home Guards, and there was a report that several Black men or Negroes were found dead in uniform. These were men that were part of the first Indian Home Guards. And so at Poison Springs, there were some Indian troops as well as those Texans and so forth that did not like Black men. And also there was somewhat of a payback from the victory at Honey Springs in the Indian Territory.
Right. And, you know, the myths that you alluded to earlier that was written in the policy that Black men couldn't make good soldiers or wouldn't make good soldiers, that was all changed, or that myth was put to rest by these brave men who showed that they could fight just as well as anyone. That's
correct. One of the other things that is overlooked is that General Frederick Steele, who was head of the Department of Arkansas, the Union head of the Department of Arkansas, didn't care for colored troops. And so he really didn't do much for them, and he used them basically for pioneer trains, for digging ditches, for moving his wagons, his teamsters, and so forth. And he was not interested in them as being combat troops. And so, like with the first Kansas Colored, they suffered the brunt of that disdain or that's dislike by Frederick Steele.
As we know, the war ends, and having African Americans have demonstrated that they make great soldiers. And unlike the policy previously, they weren't now barred from military service. Now they were segregated, but they at least were allowed to serve in the United States military. So there was an attitude that changed in somewhat that they could make good soldiers. In fact, later we have the Buffalo Soldiers who were prominent after the Civil War.
Yeah, what happens after the war is that it's really interesting. There is Company D of the 57th, which was originally the 4th Arkansas Regiment of African Descent. Company D was originally known as an independent company. It was known as the Liberian Guards. And for each one of the men that are being discharged, they take with them their Springfield rifle and accoutrements. And so, you know, you have to think about where are these guys going and what are they going to do if they're checking out of service and they have their muskets that they use during the military stint in service. Some of these men would actually end up going west and serving in the 9th and 10th Cavalry in the West. Also, that's interesting is that the 57th United States Colored Troops in 1866 were forced to go to New Mexico and to help out in the West. So some of the Black troops in Arkansas, at least the 57th, ended up early on going out into the West.
And then the history of African Americans in the military after that, you know, they would serve in the war with Mexico. They actually do quite a bit in Cuba, but are overshadowed by, you know, Roosevelt and the Rough Riders. They're involved in the Philippines during that insurrection and during the Spanish War there. World War I, they distinguished themselves, except, as you know, they're not allowed to fight for the United States, but they're given to France. And then in World War II, again, distinguished themselves, but had to fight segregated. And it seems African Americans they're still treated as second-class citizens, but they're willing to fight for their country.
That's correct. And speaking of relatives, I had an uncle that served in, a great uncle that served in World War I. I had an uncle that served in the U.S. Navy during World War II. And then I had another uncle who integrated, I won't call it integrated. He was one of the first 1,000 Black men that became a part of the U.S. Marine Corps. And so it's also interesting that his dress blues, he was not issued, that those men had to buy that uniform out of their pockets. The government would not provide for them to have that issued to them.
And so after World War II, in 1947, President Truman finally desegregates the military. And now Black soldiers, Marines, airmen, sailors are fighting with one another. And Korea would be the first war the United States military would fight with integrated troops. And I've often thought, and maybe you can expand on this, that even starting back in the Civil War on, African-American troops proved themselves and showed their loyalty, their mettle to fight. And in a lot of ways, the civil rights movement that we would later see in the 50s and 60s were led by these veterans and their accomplishments.
Right. Yeah, it's interesting that a good number of Civil War veterans would live all the way up until about 1930s. So again, you had these former veterans, and also they were grandfathers and great-grandfathers to some of these men who now would end up serving in World War II and in Korea. So my point is that a lot of these men now who served in Korea and had served in World War II knew of the dedication, the service that their parents or great-grandparents had given and done during the wars in the past. So they realized that they helped build this country and keep the safeguard of this country.
Exactly. You mentioned that I mentioned at the beginning of this interview that you had a descendant who fought in the Civil War. Could you talk about them?
Yeah, his name was Aaron Hervey, and he was a slave in Coahoma County, Mississippi. And then him and another man by the name of Burl Eastman ran away from their plantation and caught a Union gunboat. And the gunboat basically just landed them over in Helena, Arkansas. And then 2 days later, he was a part of the 4th Arkansas Regiment of African Descent, otherwise known as the 57th United States Colored Troops. So he served from 1864 is when he went in, all the way up until 1866 when he was discharged out of service.
And then what became of him after that?
Well, he became a minister. You know, a lot of those guys didn't get, how should I put it, decent jobs. So, you know, he became like a janitor and a preacher after that.
And did he reside in Arkansas?
Yes, he resided in Little Rock. And he's buried up at the National Cemetery there in Little Rock.
Now, I also mentioned earlier in the introduction that you were the designer and help and guest curator of the exhibit Freedom, Oh Freedom, Arkansas People of African Descent and the Civil War. Can you tell us about how you came up with that? And obviously there's a passion there for such an exhibit. And really, I think at the time, there had not been a lot of focus on African-American troops in the Civil War. And your exhibit really did justice to them.
Well, thank you. Well, in essence, as you mentioned earlier, my years, my personal knowledge, also being a descendant, I have researched for a number of years. I've gone through over 10,000 soldiers of African descent that served in Arkansas. And so I'm talking about guys from Iowa, from Kansas, and so forth. And so I knew this history. I had read some of their firsthand account of their experiences. I had also studied some of the generals and officers and who were over these men. And so the concept was to come about telling the story of how, well, let me just back up just briefly. As a senior at Little Rock Central High, maybe I think I was in the junior class, I was taking a class in American history. And my teacher basically said that, and she had to teach this course on the Civil War as part of American history. So she basically said that Lincoln freed the slaves and the slaves lived kind of like happily ever after. And I could never take that that approach and believe that that was all that ever happened. And so once I found out that I had a relative that served in the Civil War, it made me do more research. And of course, I met with Dr. Greg Irwin, who was at UCA at the time, and he helped me with the materials. And then from there, I went to the National Archives, and from there, it went on and on from there. So I ended up doing Civil War reenacting and so forth on the movie Glory. So all of these things helped me tell the story better because I had an understanding of maybe what these men may have went through, and also the history, the background, and also I had some personal account by going through their pension records.
Right. And what are some projects that you're working that you can share with us that you're working on now?
Well, I'm a person that have my hands in a lot of things. As an artist, it's been a while since I've been able to get back to doing artwork. And so I'm doing some writing, and I got a couple of projects with some parks. But again, with this COVID virus, those things have been put on hold.
Right. And I neglected to mention earlier that you were the first director of the Arkansas Black History Commission here in Little Rock.
Right.
And so when your time here in Little Rock, you were very active in many things as well. So it's not surprising you're still active now.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's a lifestyle. It's what you have a passion for. These are stories that need to be told. There are stories that are out there that people need to be able to be engaged with. So that's what I'm doing. That's what I'm about.
Well, I thank you for your interview, sharing your thoughts and your knowledge with us. And I think even today, even though you started the work at African-American soldiers, when we tell the Civil War story and after, they still don't get the recognition that they deserve. And so I know I'm trying to change that. A lot of historians are trying, and educators are trying to change that, because certainly they deserve their story to be told.
Well, thank you, Shannon. Also, thanks to the Military History Museum, because you all are doing a great job. One exhibit I know you all had there is one on one of Arkansas's African-American fighter pilots, Colonel Woodrow Crockett, who I had an opportunity to meet and know. So great work you all are doing.
Exactly. Thank you. We want to tell the story of all of our veterans and all of our soldiers, and it's one of our missions. So I thank you for sharing your time with us, and hopefully we will be seeing some exciting projects from you in the future.
Thank you. I truly appreciate it.